this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Firstly, Mr Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the Minister. I think this will be his first bill in the House as the Minister for Primary Industries. And it's fairly obvious, actually, because he's given so much praise to his officials. I'm sure that probably down the track he won't place so much faith in all the advice that he gets from them, particularly in this area, because it is an area that has been fraught over the years. And I acknowledge, and it's through this opposition party supporting the bill, that this is a good piece of legislation.
Well done.
It is well intended, it is necessary, right, and perhaps it's overdue. But I am concerned, Mr Speaker, because it's always very difficult for myself to get up here and praise the government. But anyway, in doing so, I'm concerned. Can I say that I hope it doesn't happen too often. I'm just concerned about the framework in which the Minister, who has correctly outlined all the provisions in the bill, and I think that's great, but he said that foreign charter vessels have vastly improved their operation since the inquiry. Well, I'm not sure that that would be the case, and I know, in fact, that this will be necessary to make the changes, because there's a culture in foreign charter vessels that has been allowed to continue for too long, in spite of warnings to us in government as well, and officials denying the reality of the conditions on those boats. It has taken too long for us to sort this out. I applaud the government. I would like to acknowledge our former colleague Paul Swain, his chair of the inquiry. The report was a good one. It correctly identified the problems that we've perhaps known about, we have investigated. In fact, I don't think the member was a member of the Primary Production Select Committee, but we had an inquiry back in the early 2000s when another piece of legislation came through the system. We knew things weren't right. We brought the officials in. We sought information, assurance. We were given it. And I'm sure Mr Ardern, as a member of the committee at the time, will remember the assurances we were given, quite wrongly, in fact, that all was well, we could enforce fair conditions, fair protection for workers on foreign charter vessels. Well, we couldn't, and we didn't. And I guess we have to apologise to all the workers of those vessels over a number of years who have been effectively slaves for many, many reasons. And my colleague in Littleton and the Port Hills electorate, has met many of them, as we all have. Mr Speaker, as I say, I'd like to just go back to a bit of history. In 1997, when the Fisheries Bill went through, 96, 97, in fact, it was our former colleague Graham Kelly who insisted at that time that anyone working on a boat catching New Zealand fish should be paid at New Zealand rates of pay and New Zealand rate conditions. And it was agreed at that time, somewhat reluctantly by the national government, I have to say, but it was agreed. And then there were a lot of fingers crossed in the hope that we could, in fact, carry that through and enforce that. Well, why I have some concerns is, again, the Minister in his speech to the House today says that this will ensure that we have fair payment at New Zealand rates, that we have fair protection. We can't do that on shore. We can't do that in some of the businesses around Auckland and around the country now. So it's going to be a big ask to be able to ensure that that occurs in boats a long way offshore around this country. It is with good intention that we have laws to protect workers in this country working onshore, but we can't guarantee it. We should. And what I say to the Minister is that while good intents are worthy and noble, we need proper enforcement. And the Department of Labour has shown in the past its inability to enforce the legislation around health and safety and around fair employment conditions. The government needs to put greater resource into enforcement to follow this piece of legislation through. Otherwise, we'll end up with where we've been for too long. Mr Speaker, again, back in the 1990s, we had a commitment by the New Zealand fishing industry to New Zealandisation. That was that we would move to have New Zealand owned and controlled vessels, New Zealanders catching what is an incredible resource, one of the biggest fishery zones in the world, here on our doorstep. Beautiful fish, protein that the world wants, and we had committed as a country and the industry to New Zealandisation. That is, that we should own and control it, invest in it, get the best value from it. Well, we moved in that direction, but foreign charter vessels have stopped that progress. They have been in place for too long. The requirement now to reflag, I think, is a good step. I hope that we see less of those vessels in our waters and that we have more of our own. Now, there's an argument put forward by the industry that they need these contract vessels to catch the lower value species. Well, the lower value species, dare I say, can be higher value species over time. I think we have underestimated the value of wild fish, protein grown, nurtured in the Pacific Ocean and the Tasman Ocean, in my view, is worthy of premiums in the world market. And I don't know whether we've extracted the best we can from that incredible resource. So we must move forward with that. This is one step that will add cost to some fisheries companies, and I say tough. We demand that we have standards and payments to workers in this country that are fair, at least above minimum wage, so they can survive. And it's up to the companies to work together to get better value for that incredible resource, Mr. Speaker. So Labor does support this bill. I ask a few questions because while it is progress, the Minister himself said in another quote that the suspension of registration will only occur in exceptional circumstances. So the question I ask is how many of the fishermen, fisherwomen out there will have to be underpaid before the Minister steps in and deregisters a boat? Because, well, the Director General, yes, I appreciate that, the Director General, Minister won't intervene at all, of course. That's the government's kind of mandate. We don't intervene, we don't do anything. We hand it all over to other people. Mr. Speaker, the issue here is, I hate to remind the House of the government's policy, but anyway, can I say that the question will remain, when will, I know that Minister wouldn't. Look at Leaky Holmes. That's a great example of that Minister's not in action. Mr. Speaker, can I say that with good legislation, we need the ability to intervene, to police it and to follow it and carry it through, Mr. Speaker. I'd also ask a question of the Minister. He got up and said that there would be 4 key objectives, and he named 3 of them, and I'm wondering what the fourth objective was for the fishing industry. I acknowledge and I applaud those objectives, and I think it's important that he clarify the 4 of them. There are other questions coming out about the transition period of 4 years and why indeed the government is allowing that. There are some people who believe that 2 years is a fair transition time to ensure that we have people working for New Zealanders in New Zealand who should be paid at least a minimum wage. That's a fair expectation, but the government, this piece of legislation proposes to allow that to roll out over 4 years, which in our view is too long. Mr. Speaker, this is, in summary, a good piece of legislation. It puts us on the right path, but there are many issues, and I'm sure the Primary Production Select Committee will tease them out, because we have heard many of the debates, many of the excuses, I guess, in summary, put before us over a number of years. We want to get this right. We need to ensure we have a fishing industry with a good, solid, sustainable future. And we cannot have New Zealand companies paying proper wages and providing proper conditions, competing with slave labour on boats that are decrepit, that are unsafe. And that is the situation at the moment with foreign charter vessels. Mr. Speaker, the question will be, for the coalition partner of the government, the Māori Party, to ensure that they can push through, hold fast to make sure that
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. His time has expired.
are supported through legislation.
I call Shane Arden.
Thank you.